on November 22nd, heading essentially due east. On December 3rd, it turned southeast, keeping far away from shipping lanes. On December 6th, it was due north of Oahu. On December 7th at 6 a.m., all times are Hawaiian time, approximately 275 miles north of Oahu, the first wave, consisting of 191 aircraft, took off from the 6 carriers. This attack lasted from 7:50 to 9:45, when the last planes headed back to their carriers. The major points of concentration were the airfields, which are not shown in this picture, Ford's Island, and Battleship Row. The airfields were the first objective so as to prevent American fighter planes from interfering with the Jap air attack. First, observe the smoke. This is the result of the early strikes against Hickam Field, which is shown in the background. The 3 other fields were also subjected to a fierce and effective low-level assault. Of the 500 United States aircraft, the Japanese quickly destroyed 362. Now, note the concentric waves caused by a bomb centered at the West Virginia. There is already oil spillage visible. Finally, see the 2 torpedo trails headed for the Oklahoma and the West Virginia. The smoldering ruins of Hangar 6 on Ford Island, probably taken around 9 a.m. American fighter aircraft of the 18th Pursuit Group go up in flames on Wheeler Field. The West Virginia settled down in an upright position in mud. Note how previously spilled oil intensifies the havoc. The puffs are exploding anti-aircraft shells fired by American ships, even though many were burning and some sinking. Japanese Commander Fuchida, who directed the bombing attack and led the first wave, reported his amazement that the Americans could recover from this complete surprise and tremendous damage to establish so effective a defense. He further reported, in his opinion, the Japanese could never have done so. The California, engulfed by burning oil and listing further, has begun abandoning ship. Note the awning set for Sunday religious services is still in place. The Nevada took 5 bomb hits and 2 torpedoes. As a postscript, she was salvaged and participated in the Normandy invasion of Fortress Europe on D-Day, June.
December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. The facts of yesterday and today speak for themselves. With confidence in our armed forces, with the unbounding determination of our people, we will gain the inevitable triumph, so help us God.
18 major ships sunk or damaged, 2,403 killed, including 68 civilians, 1,178 wounded. In Battleship Row, Maryland, minor damage. Nevada, severely damaged. California, severely damaged. Pennsylvania, severely damaged. Tennessee, severely damaged. Oklahoma, sunk. Utah, sunk. West Virginia, sunk. Arizona, sunk, with 1,100 sailors entombed. 363 airplanes destroyed on ground. This picture is of the Arizona Memorial. built in part on the hull and some of the superstructure of that ship as a memorial to all of those who died during this day of infamy.
Robert McEldowney, Jr. on Okinawa.
I was very, very green. So Pearl Harbor had an enormous impact on my life. It devastated my career plans, effectively delaying any real start till I was 27 years old. My family life was wrenched apart. Mary and I spent 2 years trying to be together at my training stations around the USA with limited success, and ultimately we were apart, like all the others, while I was overseas in the Pacific Theater. Mary pulled out of High Bridge and established herself for the duration with her family in Braddock, Pennsylvania. We thought we would never return. A new baby girl, Alice, was trundled around some of these duty stations or was deposited with grandparents for a couple of years. Not the most acceptable way to start raising a family. There were compensating advantages, I guess. I'm the only guy I know who got a $25 monthly raise when I left the corporate life and went on to active military duty at $150 a month. I was presented with a lot of free worldwide travel. I didn't have a mortgage to pay on, and our second-hand $800 Chevy was paid for. That car, incidentally, served us well until we got a $2,100 trade-in value for it after the war, when cars were hard to come by. My worry about A stamps, allowing 3 gallons of gas a week, was minimal. Clothing and food rationing really didn't affect my life, though it did Mary's. And I remember interesting grocery store incidents around the USA during those travels. I have never been physically healthier, never, than I was during those 3 years. I guess it was really a lot tougher on Mary. I had an interesting and productive experience while serving in the Marines. The Corps did an enormously complete job in maturing me and requiring me in a disciplined and busy program to learn how to get along with and manage people, how to survive and be reasonably happy in terribly adverse and difficult conditions. Gave me a second engineering credential, made me a cosmopolitan person after a rather narrow and localized youth, inspired me to really love my country like only others similarly exposed can understand, and gave me a great sense of participation and accomplishment in one of the most important incidents in all of human history. On top of that, we won the war, it says in the small print, and I was a contributing part of that. In training after Quantico for aviation radar in Bowdoin College in Maine, to MIT in Boston, to Corpus Christi, Texas, and then became the second officer ordered into VMFN 543, a newly commissioned night fighter squadron at Cherry Point, North Carolina. Our pilots flew F6F5N Grumman Hellcats, modified with many thousands of dollars of night intercept radar gear. My job was to keep the 15 airplanes electronically operational and to teach our 21 pilots how to use the gear. I was also the radio and communications officer. I had about 40 NCOs in my maintenance staff, most of them very highly qualified, and all of them super Marines. In late 1944, our outfit was moved to El Centro, California, then to Miramar, and then on January 2nd of 1945, we were shipped to the Pacific. After a month at Eva, near Pearl Harbor, and 8 weeks on the high seas, our squadron was finally en route to Tokyo, which was our unit's motto. And we performed very intense night fighting duty during the whole Okinawa battle as a part of the 3rd Marine Wing and under the 10th Army. The night before the invasion, our Navy AKA ship was hit by a Jap kamikaze plane, which delayed our arrival at the Kadena airstrip for about a week while being repaired. We were in combat from April 1st until the war ended in August. I think it rained most of the time. I only had my laundry done once. The food was reasonably good. Someone stole my GI pistol. I was bombed, strafed under artillery barrage, slept plenty in a foxhole, lost 30% of my pilot friends, outlasted 3 generations of pilots and 3 commanding officers, most of whom were rotated, hold on a minute, back to the non-combat areas, suffered through the damage and destruction of a lot of our airplanes, endured a Japanese Geretsu attack, which Pete asked me what that was. A Geretsu attack is when a Japanese Betty with about 25 soldiers lands belly up on your airstrip, and they all disgorge and come out with their submachine guns shooting. They're trying to shoot up the... It's sort of like a kamikaze thing. They're trying to shoot up the airstrip, and it's very non-productive militarily, but it scares the hell out of you, I'll tell you. Anyway, I suffered through a Japanese Geretsu attack and was never sick or hurt during my whole Marine Corps duty. Our squadron shot down 17 Japanese aircraft, including the last 2 destroyed by the USA at the end of the war. I'm very proud of that. And I wish we'd gotten more of them, to tell you the truth. And destroyed 4 Japanese ships. We had a few wounded in the kamikaze attack, and as mentioned, lost some fine pilot friends. We were at Okinawa, still on combat air patrol, when the atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima on August the 6th. It was big, important news to us, since Okinawa had been secured and we were starting preparations for Operation Coronet, the invasion of Japan's home islands. Countless American as well as Japanese lives were actually saved because of the 2 atomic bombs which were dropped immediately and immediately caused the Japanese surrender on August the 14th. We never had to make what would have been a terribly expensive invasion. The night of August 14th, when the Japs sued for peace, Okinawa was the last war theater where the actors had their live ammunition. The resulting celebration, or fireworks, on the island cost the lives of 21 GIs. A month later, our outfit was moved to occupation duty at the Japanese Naval Air Station in Omura, Kyushu, up in Japan, a place you never heard of. We were there about 6 weeks. It was interesting and quiet, and the Japanese were pathetically cooperative at this point. They were also still dangerously ready for our last invasion. I was glad to be a High Point Marine. You all know what that means. So came back to the States in October of '45, and after a few more adventures, I walked alone with my luggage up the hill from the railroad station to Mary's family home in Braddock, Pennsylvania, at 5 o'clock in the morning on December 21st in time for Christmas. The real and only welcoming committee was Mary, our daughter Alice, and Mary's folks. Alice had learned to talk complete sentences while her daddy was so far away, and I never earned a Purple Heart, for which I thank God.
Willard R. Young, Jr., and family.
When Jay asked me about experiences from World War II, I have to stop and think. And as to where I was when I heard the news, and that I can tell you very distinctly, was between White House and Lebanon on Route 22 west. We were on our way to Clinton, and we heard the news on the radio. I had expected something to happen shortly because I had a reserve commission as a second lieutenant in the cavalry. I was 30 years old, married, had a son 4 months old. So when I heard the news, I knew it wasn't going to be long. So on January 2nd, I received orders to report to Fort Dix on January 5. I had 3 days. I didn't even have a uniform. I had to borrow money and go down and buy a basic uniform. I heard afterwards some of the fellows who were in the same boat as I was, they reported in civilian clothes, but I wasn't that smart. So I reported to Fort Dix, and I was assigned to the staging area. Now, the staging area, for those of you who don't know what it is, was where the troops were coming in. This was, remember, from December 7 to January 5, the troops were already rolling in from all over the country to go all over the world. And it was our job to take care of them, get them outfitted, and on their way again. So we had them going to the South Pacific, we had them going to England, and it was a terribly cold period. The kitchens, which were individual in those days, were all frozen up because the 44th Division, which had been stationed there from New Jersey, was sent to Louisiana for further training, and they banked the fires, and with the sub-zero weather, everything froze up and broke. So to try and feed these people, the trains were coming in with the steam lines broken, they were cold. It was a terrible time. I was at Fort Dix for about a year and a half, I guess, doing this work. It was all kinds, 7 days a week, and doing everything, trying to take care of these people, helping to take care of these people. So, and in addition to Fort Dix, Camp Kilmer was the other staging area, which is, as most of you know, is down around New Brunswick. So, going back, speaking of things during the war, my wife, we broke up her house in Far Hills, where we were living. I'd been working for the Prudential Insurance Company, and she came back to Clinton. Her mother was a physician at the Girls' Reformatory, as they called it then. And among her other duties, she volunteered as an airplane spotter. Now, most of you haven't heard about airplane spotters, but she went there every day to the farm, which is, well, I don't know whose farm. It was Westcott's farm at that time. And there was a cupola up on top of the barn. And they had to climb up this ladder and watch for airplanes, and they had to report and call in every airplane they saw. So she did that part of the time during the war while I was away. So after leaving Fort Dix, the Army opened a new staging area up at Camp Shanks, which is above Nyack. All of this came under the New York Port of Embarkation Authority. Well, I guess I was fortunate in some ways, because I had a cavalry commission, and so they really didn't know what to do with me. And a lot of others I found out the same way, horse cavalry commissions. So fortunately, the commanding general of the New York Port of Embarkation was an old cavalryman, and he, I guess, said, give them all to me. So that's where we landed, in the staging area, under the port. And I don't know how many thousands, hundreds of thousands of troops that were shipped out of the New York Port of Embarkation. And they all had to be outfitted in the meantime. I remember various organizations came through. One was the 82nd Airborne, and we all admired the discipline, appearance, and the way they conducted themselves. I remember seeing Major General Gavin come in headquarters. I was adjutant up there at the time, and this guy comes bounding up 2 steps at a time, and I said, who's that? And they said, that's General Gavin. He was the youngest, youngest Major General at that time. He was 35 years old, and he was commanding the 82nd Airborne. And you probably read things about him during World War II. But they were, and to go on, the 82nd, I was still there after the war, and the 82nd came home. Now, many of the troops came home. It was a mob scene. There was no discipline. They were just, you know, difficult to deal with. They just wanted to get home. The 82nd came in, and they were the show outfit that paraded down Broadway after World War II. They didn't have anything else except the 82nd Airborne. So that they were a great outfit, and everybody admired them. We also had the 101st, and they compared very, very, very good with them. The discipline of those 2 outfits, and they said, don't worry about our men. If there's any trouble, we'll take care of them. And they'd wear you out saluting. If you walked around, they were great saluters. And so, anyway, I had various jobs, but I wound up as adjutant up at Camp Shanks, working with the commanding officer there, who was a colonel. But today you cannot find any traces of Camp Shanks. It's been all eliminated, and I guess a housing development the last I was up there. I was in the service for over 4 years, and I wouldn't give you a nickel for another day's experience that I had. But I wouldn't take $1 million for the experience I had. It made a great change in my life. I had an opportunity to come out here with the Hunterdon County National Bank in Hunterdon County, which I'd always wanted to come back to. And from there, I settled in Lebanon and went on from there. But the details, sure, there are a lot of details that I could give you, but in the overall, it was a great time. And of course, when I hear the people today saying, well, you know, it's tough and that sort of thing. And I heard a lady one day talking about her kids, how tough it was. I said, hey, wait a minute. We went through World War II, and her husband had been in the war. We didn't know what was going to happen from one day to the next. And we got along. Families were separated. And I might add, just last week, my wife and I celebrated our 55th wedding anniversary. So the war, I think, strengthened our bond between us. And we subsequently had a daughter just after the war ended. But I would say that it was a great experience, a great time. The country was united, and we were all trying to get the war over as soon as we could.
Calvin G. Wetstein.
We're talking about December 7th, 1941, and I'd like to share with you some of my thoughts going back to that date and the years that followed. Where was I when I heard the news? I was in my dormitory room at the New Brunswick Theological Seminary, which is adjacent to Rutgers New Brunswick campus. My dad felt that that was a good place to put me, the seminary dormitory. Little did he know. I had entered Rutgers College of Agriculture 3 months earlier, and my age at the time was 17. My initial response to the news, of course, was surprise, total surprise, even though, again, we knew that things were going to happen, but it still struck me significantly. Then, of course, anger that this had occurred, that the Japanese would attack our forces in such a manner. And then also felt, in the days following that, a deep concern for the servicemen and others on duty at Pearl Harbor. The opinion of our immediate response as a country with President Roosevelt's request for a declaration of war against Japan, Germany, and Italy, I was most supportive of our prompt reply in the form of a declaration of war. I had no reason to feel otherwise. This was a time for the nation to rally against the Japanese, and it seemed appropriate at the same time to include Germany and Italy. I'd been raised in a German-American family. My father came to the U.S. from Germany just prior to World War I. He'd become a loyal U.S. citizen, appreciating the freedom and the opportunity that was offered in his adopted country. My mother was a third-generation American, tracing her roots also to Germany. We had and still have relatives in Germany. Nevertheless, our family was indeed American. The effect on my immediate future following the December 7 attack, kind of interesting. I was enrolled in the ROTC program at Rutgers and continued that through my freshman and part of my sophomore year. Sometime probably mid-1942, I enrolled in the ERC program, which was known as the Enlisted Reserve Corps, and this allowed me to continue in school and to indicate my choice of branch of service, so that when I was called up for active duty, I would be, in my case, a Marine. Now, the effects over the next 4 years, I had been raised in a father-dominated home. Father was a Reformed Church minister in Hoboken. His congregation was predominantly German. In fact, he preached 2 sermons on Sundays, one in English and one in German. He was strict, as was my mother and later a stepmother. Going off to college in September '41 was a startling change for me. No longer accountable to anyone but myself, and I indeed enjoyed my new freedom, of course at the expense of my academic studies. So as I approached the middle of my sophomore year, I decided to quit school, kind of before perhaps something else happened to me, and thus became eligible for almost immediate call to active service. I was off to Paris Island on my 19th birthday. I responded to the service and all it had in store for me in a very positive way. Rose to the rank of sergeant, went overseas for about a year, was involved in radar maintenance on an old radar set that had a serial number 2. I basked in the sun on a quiet atoll in the Pacific, returned to the States with nothing more than a spot of jungle rot on my left leg. Attended OCS in Quantico. They changed the name by that time to Platoon Commander School, but it was still the same, graduating with the gold bars of a second lieutenant. Was then released from active duty in November 1945, back to Rutgers in February '46. Personally, the Marine Corps experience was a most significant influence on my life, and of course the war. Principally, it had a maturing effect on me that was essential to my growing up. I returned to college with a sense of purpose and a clearer picture of what life was and what life had to offer. An example would be my grades before and after my involvement in World War II. Rutgers grades were 1, 2, 3, 4, and a 6, which was failure. And my first 3 semesters before World War II, or my involvement, I had 3s and 4s and mostly 4s. No 6s. After I returned in mid-sophomore year, I had 1s and 2s. Nothing lower and more 1s than 2s. So I graduated, of all things, with honors. Incidentally, I was called back to active service for 15 months during the Korean War. Luckily, I remained stateside as a first lieutenant. There were times when I regretted opting for the Marines. Who doesn't when you're in boot camp or on a few of the other wonderful duty assignments that we became part of our life? But looking back, absolutely no regrets. From a personal point of view, I look back with a sense of appreciation.